Hi guys, we're going to continue with the next chapter, Back into the Woods. So this is after story part 2. We've had a little more history from Mig, and now our characters, they're still at the Four Winds Resort, but now they're thinking, okay, we have to keep moving, and they're going to get on the move. Just a reminder that we do have our exit ticket, and right now we haven't read the chapter, so this won't make sense. But the questions for today starts with a little background. Mig does not tell Frenchie what the smoke and yellow lights are by the end of the chapter. So you know there's going to be yellow lights and smoke at the end of this chapter. What do you think it is, and why do you think Mig doesn't tell Frenchie? Explain your answers. So think about, we talk about BHH, you need to be on topic and explain your reasoning, give an example. So take that time when you click on the exit ticket, when you click on our discussion forum link, to take your time and explain your answer. Please answer both of those questions. Listen to this chapter carefully and think about why. What do you think it is, the smoke and the lights, and why? Why does Mig not tell Frenchie? All right, back into the woods. There was something beautiful about the way the woods were now. I had no context for a before and after comparison. But I knew that the way things were now could not have existed with so many people and so much scavenging before the wars and the relocations. In this time, in this place, the world had gone mad with lush and green, throwing vines over old electrical poles and belching up rotten pipelines from the ground. Animals were making their way back, but they were different. Too much pollution and too much change. Meg said if we gave them another half a century, they'd take everything back, over, and we would be the hunted. But for now, like always, we couldn't sit around on the couches and contemplate our world and what might lie ahead. We were outside, getting ready. Snow fell in a light dusting now. It looked like glitter scraped from the underside of clouds by the scrubby top branches of the pines. The skeletons of the green trees curved under the elegant weight of the snow, bowing and twisting like ribbons in the wind. Last snow of the season, late too. Seasons poke into one another with this new earth. Mig put enough weight onto each of us so that we just began to buck, and then stopped, patting our loads and looking to the next one up to be burdened. None of us were happy. We wanted to stay at the lodge. It was warm and had walls and made us feel less in danger, less chased. Maybe that's why he wanted us gone so quickly, before we lost the will and instinct to keep moving altogether. Wob was still moving slower today after her binge, but if things had changed between us from her cracking wide open like that, she didn't let on. Riri was quieter than usual, but she worked hard to process story in silence, not wanting to prove our theories of her being too young to know the whole truth. We pulled a load of heavy cans and propane canisters and a welded hibachi barbecue in the trailer cart we'd found out back of the resort, along with Minerva's share of the camp carry. For now, she was doing okay. The few days inside had done her well, and she sang under her breath and into the top of her sweater, a nursery rhyme about a fiddle and a cat. Had the few days at the Four Winds done me good too? I wasn't sure. I had gotten closer to Rose the first night, but then she'd fairly avoided me the rest of the time. I'd heard Wob's coming to story, but I kinda wish I didn't. It was still too torn at the edges to file away. Having to watch Ree's face from the truth of our predicament was gnawing on me, knowing that she knew there was no conversation to be had, no treaties left to be signed, that we were a product, and that wasn't going to change anytime soon. There was the run, or there was death, with nothing in between. And sleeping inside just made me dream about my brother. It was nice to see him, but always by the end of the dream he was gone. Better to be in the forest, I thought, where the dreams were shrouded in fog and cold, and the group knew its order and stride by the weight of our want. We're into April now, Meg said. See the buds on those trees? He pointed up with his thin lips. We'll have more cover soon, and more sickness because of the wet ground. No time for sickness. At the beginning of winter, most of us came down with a bad cough that shook our ribs and rattled our heads, which responded by leaking thick mucus into our scarves and onto our sleeves, Minerva boiled cedar branches and pine needles into medicine, and fed it each of us every 2 hours. Sick makes her nervous, Xinguang told me. She lost a baby 1 year to the sick. Minerva had a baby? No, responded Tree. He was one of us, one of the leftovers. But he became hers, and then one winter he died from cough. I did see panic in Minerva's eyes the next time she stopped to scoop thick medicine into us, opening her mouth to imitate what we should do, as if we were all sick babies she was trying to save. It was tough walking away from the resort. I looked back more than once. What if we had stayed there a bit longer? Would Rose have visited me in my room again? Would she have gotten over whatever weirdness sat between us now, and have even just fallen asleep on my shoulder by the candle fire? I'd never know for sure. I could dream about it, though. I was thankful for the gift of dreams more than ever. Slapper and Riri were still little, so they were closer to the vicious edge than the rest of us. Their contempt for Mig and his power over the group seeped to the surface. Who made him chief, anyway? Slapper moaned, kicking rocks as we started into the woods. Yeah, who? Echoed Riri, kicking at the air beside her friend. Her anger was made cute with her little voice and slight lisp of youth. She was wearing a new pair of bright pink rubber boots. She'd found them under the bed in her room the first morning. Look, they're made out of candy, she'd said, then licked the shiny surface of one boot and cringed. Not candy. Riri had never had candy, but she'd seen pictures and heard stories about it. So every time something was shiny or bright, and these boots were definitely both, she assumed they were candy. It was a constant disappointing hunt for her. You goof, I laughed at her screwed-up face. They're not candy, they're just shiny plastic. Put them on. I helped her out of her old runners that were too big and had been handed down from Slapper. The boots popped on, and she stood in them. They fit me, French! She squealed, clomping down the hall one way and then back. I couldn't help but giggle along with her as she stomped by. When she got to the far end, though, she stopped, her little dark head hanging a bit. What's wrong? Do they pinch? I said. Maybe she was Nish. Maybe they took her out of her bed. What? She turned around. Maybe the girl whose boots these are got taken. Maybe she had a bad dream, and then they knew she was Nish. And they called in the Crooters, and they took her. There was a hitch between Took and her. She was close to tears. No way, Riri. If she was Nish, she would be too fast for any old recruiter. No one would leave these. She looked down at her shiny feet. No one would leave these on purpose. She couldn't believe her luck and assumed the worst for their backstory. Now that she knew what was really going on, her imagination had a dark streak in it. Nah, I tried to cheer up. I bet she was some rich kid, the kind with yellow curls and her very own pierced ears. I bet she just had so many shoes with her that she forgot this pair. I bet she didn't even notice they were gone. Yeah, she stomped past me. I'm gonna go find Slapper. She made her way down the stairs, jumping down one at a time. I wasn't sure she'd bought my version of the origin of the boots, but the next day she was wearing them as she chased after Slapper through the huge front room with the double fireplace. We had been walking since daybreak, but it was noon before we smelled the smoke. Where's that coming from? Slapper lifted his wide nose to the air like a puppy. I smell cooking. No, that's not cooking, it's just smoke, I corrected. Why else would there be smoke? Said Slapper. Fire, replied Meg. He didn't seem shocked. He must have smelled it for the past mile. The old fox. Fire? Without cooking? Slapper looked around for confirmation. But why? Haven't you ever heard of an accidental fire? It was Riri who answered. The fear in her face made me think she must have seen one of these accidental fires up close in her short lifetime. Slapper mirrored her expression, though he shook his head no. French! Mig called me over to him. I need you to climb that pine and check it out. Do a 360, would ya? I nodded, wiggled out of my burden, and took a run at the tall tree he'd pointed out. I climbed hand over foot for as long as momentum would take me, and then switched to a slower shimmy up the branches. Started, and I could use them as steps. It grew quiet in the cushion of brush, the air thick with needles and sap. I paused for a minute and listened. My own breath, the measured thud of my heart, and the slow whoosh of a constant cold wind. Despite the urgency, despite the world as it was at that moment, I felt content, maybe even a little more than that. I was alive and climbing a tree, and a girl that I was weak for was safe on the ground below, and I was doing something strong to keep her safe, to keep all of them safe. Felt old-timey, and something lush burst open in my chest. Then I resumed the climb, pulling myself from foothold to handhold until the branches thinned and the trunk narrowed so that my hands touched on the other side when I hugged it before the next shimmy up. I found a good crook to hold me steady and looked out. The smoke coiled above the treetops, a single cumulus bloom of gray, far enough to the west that it looked manageable. Below it the trees were moving in impossible directions, shaking back and forth, then swaying like fainting giants, then popping out of sight. Plumes of dust kicked up as they winked out. Straining, I heard the slow rumble of enterprise, a low, steady thrum. The disappearance of the trees paused, and when the dust settled to a solid haze, there was a flash of yellow in the gap. I sighed, not making sense of it, but understanding enough to know I had to get to Meg and relay the scene. I began the slow, controlled fall back down. "Well, is it food?" Slapper called up through the cupped hands when I was about 10 feet up. Tree gave him a light chuck on the shoulder. "What? A man can't be hungry?" I leapt the last 4 feet and dusted off my pants. "Meg, it's really weird. You should see the—" He cut me off. "Let's talk about that up front here, French. No need to bother anyone, but it's so— French! Up front with me. Cheeboy, take the back. Everyone grab your stuff." He was stern now, back to his order-barking tone. Cheeboy slipped off the trail to reappear in behind the twins. He was used to obeying. I shrugged back into my pack and dragged my feet to follow Meg, upset that I had news I couldn't share, especially with Rose, who looked at me now with curious dark eyes. I could have dragged that story out for a mile at least, could have spoken in a low voice so I'd have to stay close to her ear, maybe even thrown an arm over her shoulder. Meg, so bossy. Riri and Slapper were right. Who died and made this guy chief? Wanted all the info for himself first? I stomped up beside Meg, who kept a few yards to the front. "Tell me." "I saw smoke and stuff." "What stuff?" "Trees moving and something yellow under the smoke." "Where?" "West." He didn't ask anything more for a full 2 minutes, and we walked in silence. Minerva was feeding her new grandson when the recruiters busted in her home, he said. They took the baby and left her for dead. They answered to no one but the Pope himself back then. I unintentionally slowed down, so shocked I couldn't make my feet move with proper cadence. That shock froze into anger, and I sped back up directly beside Meg. He continued. Wob was alone for 2 whole years before she came to us. For the last 6 weeks of that time, she fell us in the trees, unable to trust that we wouldn't hurt her too. I knew she was there. I could see her peeking closer at night when she thought we were asleep. Again I said nothing, thinking of the story she'd shared with us at the Four Winds. Both Riri and Slapper first came to us with a parent each. Both of them lost them to the schools later on. Riri was just a baby when her mother was dragged off. Slapper, his dad went crazy one night, running straight into a recruiter camp before we could stop him. "Stop," I whispered. He took a few more strides. Tree and Xingwang, they were held by a colony of townspeople who tried different ways to extract their dreams, figuring they'd found some kind of personal reservoir with Indian twins. We found them tied up in a barn, dangling from rope as scarecrows. He sighed, paused for another breath. They were full of holes and stitched up, and with a pinky missing on each hand. They were 7 then. I wanted to throw up. "Stop, please." I could barely get out the words. "I lost my husband in the school. We were taken there together." "Isaac?" I asked, remembering my father's first meeting with Meg. He nodded. "That's my wedding ring. Isaac had the same." He slowed a bit, wavering off to the side, nearer to the trees, reaching out to lean against a birch as he paused. I stopped begging him to stop. And that's where we're going to stop. Thanks, guys!